back. Giants baseball, past, present, and future. I'm Ralph Tyko. My co-host is Tim Haller. We have two segments in one, so this is kind of a special show. Sit back, enjoy, and think Giant baseball. We're back. Bay Area baseball, past, present, and future. I'm Ralph Tyko, my co-host. He's actually the host of the show, Tim Haller. That was a great introduction, Timmy, wasn't it?
That's okay. Hey, I've heard a lot worse, especially at certain, bachelor parties and Las Vegas types of events, that kind of thing.
Good. I'm right up there with the worst, which is great. But I try, and I'm sincere in that, and I am sincere when I say this is fun. I'm enjoying doing this week after week. I want to say your mom was sick last week, and we couldn't do this. I hope she's better. It's Mother's Day weekend this week. How's she doing?
You know, there are good days and bad days for Mom, and then earlier this week she had some, I guess, or two cataracts removed, and that kind of set her back a little bit. She has times of confusion, or she doesn't really understand everything that's going on around her at times. It goes a little too fast for her. But she's at the heart of, the San Francisco Bay, and she was and is a tremendous mother.
Absolutely.
So every day that she's here, and we get to enjoy her, Yeah,
it's on a personal note. I don't get to enjoy my mom anymore, but I have wonderful memories. And the older I get, and the longer it is she's been gone, the more I think about her, not the less I think about her. And my son lost his mom earlier in this year, and it's his first Mother's Day without her. So a little shout out to Philip Tyko in Alameda, California. I'm sorry you're going through that, big guy. I know how it is. There you go.
Yeah, just
all right.
One of those things, let's go ahead and just extend a warm and loving happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there who've had to tolerate guys like you and I, Ralph, growing up,
And I'm sure for your mother it wasn't as easy as was written about.
Absolutely not. I put her through hell.
Me too. But that in those days, and mothers were a different breed, it seems, and they put up with a lot more, and they were a little more flexible than. But we're both blessed to have been loved and known we were loved, and a lot of folks don't get that. So for that reason,
absolutely.
Yeah. If a mother can pass that on to their kid, and just so they know all their lives that Mom loved them, despite all you put them through. Hey, you became a second baseman, not a catcher, so I'm sure that had to have set her back a little bit.
Yeah, I did actually. I recall the day that we were all sitting around and Dad made the decision for everybody that he thought it was best that I play the infield because he said I ran so fast, and I won't use the expletive he used, but I ran so fast he said he would feel guilty as if I continued to catch, and I was a really good backstop. I really had an awareness and an understanding of that position, and that's genetic probably more than anything, and being around it and watching and observing. Dad said, you're going to play the infield, and that's all there is to it, because you can fly, and you're going to blow out your legs, and he said, I don't want that on my conscience,
Right. There was one catcher, I can't think of his name, with the A's recently, who was started with Pittsburgh. He was very fast, and
Oh,
remained
yeah,
fast.
Kendall.
Jerry Kindle, right? Jerry Kindle's kid. Kindle was his dad was a catcher with San Diego way back in the day,
Right.
and
Right.
so there is a certain amount of inheriting it all. If like in the minors when he played with short rosters, and you were playing second base, if there was an injury to a catcher, would they have known that you were the guy to go to? Just out of curiosity.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you know what? It was well known, throughout the organization that in the event something like that were to have occurred, then I would have. There was a kid I played with who actually went to San Francisco State, a kid named Dave Sheldon, who had also the ability to catch. So in the event that somebody went down, we actually did. I probably caught a couple of innings. I don't remember the number of innings I caught, but when need be, you absolutely got behind the plate if that was our last straw. And so injuries, I remember going through a 7 or 10 day stretch of having the worst cold and flu I ever had, and being hooked on cough medicine for about a good week, and trying to remember everything, and be present for the game. There was no injuries. Unless you blew something out, there was a blowout of a shoulder or a knee or an ankle or something, you played. There's no getting around it. I remember I took a really sharp beating to my right elbow batting left-handed, and it was my throwing arm, and I got it right in the perfect spot. And it just so happened the shortstop.
Right on the funny bone that isn't all that funny.
No, absolutely not. And the shortstop, I was playing shortstop for a couple of weeks because our shortstop was a guy named Randy Velarde, who was called up to AAA to fill in a spot for another guy that went up to the big leagues because he went in to replace Ozzie Guillen. So everybody, the succession sort of type of thing. And Randy left for a couple of weeks to go to AAA, and I played shortstop, and it was the first game of a doubleheader, and I took that pitch off that right elbow. And thank God my trainer had one of those scuba suit things, but it was only for the throwing arm. It was cut off. And it compressed my right arm. It compressed my right elbow. When I had it on, I couldn't feel it. I couldn't feel the bruise, the contusion. But at night when I
and it
it off,
swell, obviously.
No, it compressed it, and it was comfortable using it while I had that injury. But I'll tell you what, that thing was painful. And we just didn't have those opportunities to even take a night off. It's pretty dog eat dog.
What's the umpiring like in the minors? Is it all that bad?
No, it really isn't. These guys are very well trained and schooled. I played with a lot of guys that are still umpiring in the big leagues now. Angel Hernandez and Brian Gorman, and there's a handful of guys that worked in the minor leagues when I was still playing, and they're still doing it. It's competitive. It's highly competitive. It's very similar to that of a baseball organization where you start out in low A and work your way up. Each consecutive or succeeding year, you go from single A to double A. You might stick 2 years in double A and then do another year in triple A, and then get an opportunity if you're good enough and the powers that be see the talent. Being an umpire, not only do you have to have the ability to just have incredible, vision and hearing and all of those things, you have to have a certain type of a demeanor in terms of, it is a thankless job. The travel, they never go home. There is no home base for umpires. And
every day is a road trip, and you never get that home crowd, and everybody hates you home or away.
They do, and they'll come in and work a series or a home stand, and then they'll travel off to the next city. And they're dispersed all over, and they'll go from one end of the country to the other. There isn't anything geographical really about it either. And right. So it's a tough life for these guys. And I know the stories that my Uncle Bill told me, how, and you could see it. It was a hard life. It was not an easy life, but, if you have that special type of demeanor, you're going to be a really good umpire. And, it takes away.
Bill was an umpire. How many years in the big leagues?
24 years in the American League. Now, that was back when they had American League and National League umpires. Now they're all Major League umpires. But, back when he was working, they had, in each league. So, and even then it was even harder, obviously, because there were fewer clubs, thus fewer games. So you had to be really good to be a Major League umpire, to get a shot and play working in the major leagues.
Right, and the idea of always be traveling, it takes a certain amount of. I lived when I did comedy, when I did the Tops gig that I had, where I was the Tops rep in the Northwest League and the California League during summers. I was on the road a lot in my life, and it can be lonely. You have to be a self-entertainer. You have to either read or love music or love something about the people of the cities you go to, the architecture, post office, or whatever it is. Road life can be very, very difficult being alone.
It is. It's grueling, too, physically, emotionally, spiritually, because you don't really have any real connection, and you hope to God that the guys you're working with, you have some compatibility with them, because you can go eat dinner or have a meal with them and enjoy each other's company, go to a movie, whatever it is. Otherwise, you're really in a bad spot because you don't really have a whole lot of friends, people that know you.
Right.
So it's a lonely existence.
I wonder what motivates people to get into that in the first place. Just the love of the game, wanting to be around it, because there's no rooting interest that you can take and still maintain your credibility. I guess wanting to be around the game, wanting to be a part of the game.
Yeah, you just really got to love it. You got to love it so much that all of those other things are secondary or not, they're not that important. And there are a very select few, maybe 1 or 2% of those guys that enjoy having that authority. They really do.
Right.
And that's the psychological thing. They like the fact that they're in charge and they can tell anybody what they can do. And there were a couple of guys like that. And believe me, Ralph, I know I'm a really nice guy on this show, but when I was between the white lines, oh boy, you would hear about it if there was something not jiving with me, And I got tossed on quite a few occasions. I got into quite a few arguments and ultimate, getting kicked out, those kind of things.
I was listening to a game today, and they were talking about umpires' strike zones, and it doesn't matter if they call them high, low, in or out, as long as they're consistent. And I'll bet that most of the arguments that you got into were inconsistencies. That would drive me more nuts than anything else in the world. If a strike is a strike for that guy, it's a strike for that guy. But if it changes from moment to moment for that guy,
and game to game, yeah, exactly. And that is probably the biggest thing, consistency. You got to be able to if you're going to call a ball up, make it a strike and keep it a strike for both sides, for both clubs. Same thing with the low strike. Same thing with the pitch away. Same thing with the pitch in. But I will tell you this, I do feel that guys that call balls and strikes, there were some really good umpires, and then there were some not such good umpires. And I would get feisty with some umpires that just didn't have a clue about the zone. If it was a ball, it was a ball. I don't care. And I would certainly have a conversation about that. If that pitch was down and away or off the plate or inside and almost hitting me or something to that effect, I would certainly let them know it. And I would tell them, you know,
it's probably a matter of their concentration level. And me being somewhat OCT or whatever it is, they told me what it was. I wasn't paying attention. I can certainly identify with it, but, you know, an umpire is behind the plate once every 4 or 5 games, let alone days. I mean, buckle up, for crying out loud, and concentrate, because there's not much to it when you're when you're a base umpire. I mean, you could hide a lot there, but you can't from behind the plate.
And even if you start to make a few bad calls out in the field, everybody's going to know it too. Not only the players and the fans, but the guys you're working with. You know, these umpires take great pride in getting it right. And, you know, it's funny, we're talking about this tonight. Part of our conversation is about umpires, et cetera. I remember sitting at my grandmother's dinner table one night with my dad and my uncle and my grandma, and we were just sitting there talking, and I was probably, you know, middle years of high school, 15, 16 years old.
What a life is that? This is so cool.
And my Uncle Bill, I know, and I look back on it now and I think, wow, that happened. You know, I mean,
a major league umpire, major league catcher, and the woman that bred them.
And tolerated them all those years, because those two would beat the living crap out of each other when they were young, you know. I mean, it got pretty gnarly anywhere, too. It would have been in the kitchen, in the living room, out in the backyard. They'd beat the crap out of each other. And that I remember sitting there, and we were talking.
People pictured them with their arm around each other, and, you know, you picture major league catcher, major league umpire. Your uncle actually umped a game that we've talked about this before, that your dad was a part of. So you just got to picture a quiet confidence about them. You don't picture them beating the shit out of each other in the middle of the living room table.
You don't when they got into some heated arguments later too. They used to really get after each other when it came to union stuff, and you know, the umpires, and well, later on, Uncle Billy was a scout with the White Sox and the Yankees, and you know, Uncle Bill was much more blue-collar than my father, and my dad was blue-collar, don't get me wrong, but my dad had other privileges because he played and then became an executive. My dad had, you know, I guess he had greater opportunity financially than my Uncle Bill. And so my Uncle Bill...
It always comes down to management and labor. When you
and as much as my father was, and very involved in the whole free agency thing back in the late 60s and early 70s, especially with Curt Flood and all of that, and he was always the team rep as far as the player rep, et cetera, and he was very, very involved in the development of you know, the collective bargaining agreement. And Marvin Miller, he and Marvin Miller were very close. And now
Marvin Miller needs to be in the Hall of Fame.
Absolutely.
It's unforgivable that he is not in the Hall of Fame. He changed the face of baseball for the better. When it comes down to it, the players were basically in slavery before.
Yeah, they were meat. It was like you know, and they were treated just like that. They had no opportunity. All they could do, all they could control was going out and playing. They didn't have any say in really how much money they were going to make. If they were involved in a transaction, hey, you're gone. You're going somewhere else. Thank goodness for the work that Mark Miller did.
Giamatti wrote a book in shortly before he died, saying something like, they would have played for nothing. And he talks about guys that were in the 50s and did this bullshit. These guys wanted unions from the time that Sal Magli went to the Mexican League, and it was just way back then. They wouldn't have played for nothing. They didn't want to make a $5,000 a year minimum salary in the 50s. No, they wanted freedom to at least if they were trapped behind 4 or 5 guys in an organization, you could spend your entire career in the minors, whereas you might have been good enough to play on some other team, and you were controlled in those days. So, it was a big fight to get the union. I personally think the pendulum has swung the other way, and I think the union has a lot of, you can't say too much power, but I will say the union isn't always putting the player's best interest ahead of some of the other things. And
I have to agree with you. I got to agree with you on that too. I think that there are some rights and some privileges now that they have that can be debated and are questionable. But I think it's a lot better for the guys today. That's for sure. The players today, and you know what, to a fault, I think there's a little bit too much coddling. There's a little bit too much, if I have a hangnail, I got to sit out 4 or 5 days, that kind of thing. And they're truly not earning their money, and they're getting such exorbitant amounts of money now.
Then they're earning it because somebody's giving them the money. See that?
Well, my definition of, though, if you're going to earn it, you have to actually go out and perform. Do you follow me? I mean, you actually have to be out there, and then you're policed. You're policed by your teammates, your peers. If you're not hustling down the line, if you're not running running a ball down in the gap, you're going to hear about it.
They have 12 cameras on you, and they're timing you on 8,000 different statistics of first step quickness. They have all these things going where they literally measure you like a racehorse. And what they don't realize, or what has always been a lifelong thing, my lifetime, you can't really judge players like robots. Because players have days where other things besides their physicality comes in. They may have a bad day with the wife. They may have a good day with the wife. They may have a good day with somebody else's wife. They may have a bad day with somebody else's wife. Their kids may be acting up. Their kids may be off in Chicago on a street corner somewhere. You don't know when you go out to the play.
But that's the thing. That's the human side of it. These guys are still human beings.
Right.
And a lot of people, the average fan sometimes doesn't realize that. That they go home to their families or they have issues in their families. There might be somebody who has Down syndrome. I know a lot of guys that I played with and friends of mine that are involved in baseball that have things like that going on and behind the scenes. And we have no idea what they are going through on a day-to-day basis, except for 3 or 4 hours of their day while they're out working, and we get to watch it. So
the infielder with the Angels, I can't think of his name right now, for some reason had a son with Down syndrome, and he was very out front with that. I just can't.
Right, and he's now a broadcaster for the Kansas City Royals. So they call them the Crime Dog.
A little odd instance where he was at the airport with the Angels, and they busted him for that. He ended up losing his job there. Great guy, great hustler, and overachiever. and I really feel terrible that I can't remember his name.
Yeah, his name escapes me right now as well, but I'm going to remember it before the show is over. But I'll give you a case of one of my dearest best friends is a guy named Mark Grant. Mark pitched with the Giants and several other clubs, and now he's working with the Padres as the color guy on their television broadcast. And Mark and I are very close. We're very best of friends. But he has a son, Aiden, who is affected by Down syndrome. And, you don't just hear about that every day, but Mark does the things that he does, not just for his son, but for organizations like that. And the heart of this man, Mark Grant, is just so loving. And you would never know that because all you're doing is listening to him for 3 hours in the evening doing a baseball game.
Right.
And you don't have any idea of what heartaches and the things that he and his wife Mary have had to go through during the course of this young man's life as he's now a teenager, and the routines of their life.
Mark must have to departmentalize that in his life. To do a game, you take 3 hours and just remove all the outside thinking, and that's not easy, and that but it could be the most cathartic time for him just to get out of his own head.
It's very therapeutic for him. I know that. And to be around those guys and the men he loves and the game he loves, I know it's good for him. I know it's good for him. But, I want to go back to what we were talking about when we were sitting around the dinner table, my dad and my Uncle Bill. And we were talking about the pitch, like, what is that? An umpire will, this is what my dad said, and I thought it made pretty good sense. Most of what he said made good sense. Not everything, but most of it. And one thing he did say was, an umpire is thinking about, all he has to think about is that next pitch. If it's a ball or a strike. Pretty simple. He said, as a catcher, I've got to think 3-4 pitches down the line. And I got to think about that guy in the on-deck circle who's coming up to hit, because I've got to think about what the repertoire is of pitches we're going to throw at him. So I could be thinking 3, 4, 6, 7 pitches ahead of time when all the umpire has to do is think about the next pitch, if it's a ball or a strike. And he was kind of needling my uncle a little about that. They even into their older years, boy, they really would get under each other's skin quite a bit. And some of it was for fun, and other times it was really antagonizing. But
you had to push each other's buttons.
Oh boy, did they ever! And my Uncle Bill, being a couple years older than my dad, I remember later too, when I was playing with the White Sox, it was winter time and we were sitting in the kitchen, same, just fast forward several years, 10 more years later, and Uncle Bill is scouting for the White Sox. My dad, is out of baseball. And my Uncle Bill said something to the effect of, the scouts should get a little love here, because they're the ones that are really making it happen by getting out there and driving all these back roads and going to these high schools and pick up games to try to find some decent prospect that one day might just find their way to the major leagues. And back and forth, these two guys got after it. And I swear, these two grown men, I thought for a minute there they were going to start going to blows. Just because Uncle Billy thought that and my dad had more of that management sort of, philosophy of things, but.
Sure,
anyway.
That's what separates us all. It's management. Everybody, you're either working for somebody or somebody's working for you in life.
Absolutely.
And if somebody's working for you, you're not getting enough for what you're paying them. And if you're working for somebody else, you're not being paid enough to exchange the time that you're giving up. See, that's what people don't realize. It's not about the money. It's about quality time. And so it makes it difficult. I want to find out, was your uncle an athlete? Was he a catcher as well before he went into umpiring?
Uncle Bill, he was a very good athlete. He was 6'7", and he's probably 6'5" now. But he was 6'7". He was a really good basketball player, very good pitcher, pretty good athlete. He played a little first base as well. He could hit, but he really loved football. And he was actually the kicker at Joliet Junior College in Joliet, Illinois. But then he, after his 2 years of playing football at the junior college there, he enlisted. He went into the Army. So, he spent 4 years in the service. And then after that, he went down to umpiring school. So, but he loved athletics. He loved sports. He didn't have the same sort of talent my dad had. And I recall just recently, because we still talk, probably once a week or every 2 weeks still. And he said something to me he'd never mentioned to me before or anything like that. But he said, Timmy, I think that your dad, when he was young, before he got traded, he said, I thought your dad was going to be a Hall of Fame catcher. And he sounded a little bit disappointed. He said he got traded to those damn Dodgers. He said that ballpark was like a cavernous, and it was, boy, Dodger Stadium back in the day, you had to hit that thing so far and so hard to get it into the gaps. And, and Dad became a different player. He became more of an average, higher average hitter there, and his power numbers went down. But I just thought, wow, that pretty complimentary of his brother to say that years and years after Dad's death, that he would say something like that. And you know what? If he's going to say something like that, I don't care if he's my uncle or not, but he's a guy that was around the game of baseball his whole life. And to give an assessment like that, I thought, well, I'll take that one to heart because he kind of knows a little bit about what he's talking about,
Yeah, he was a good, solid player. I think back to that catching tandem when your dad first came up with Ed Bailey. And you mentioned the tutelage that he got from Ed Bailey once before. Hope you'll elaborate on that because Ed Bailey was, when I was a kid growing up in the 50s, he was with the Redlegs. They called them the Redlegs at that time because of the evil red menace that they had to nickname a ball club because they didn't want to call them Reds because McCarthy was out there with this crazy thing. But what a world we still live in. But Ed Bailey was a solid guy for many years, came to the Giants, and it seemed that it was just the right time because he was almost on the downhill stretch. Your dad was coming up, and they could complement themselves beautifully and give Ed some rest and break your dad in slowly on a team, a 1962 Giant team that went to the World Series and was literally a line drive away from winning the World Series.
Yeah, probably 8 inches away from winning a World Series. Absolutely. I recall, younger obviously when Dad was playing and how he would tell me how Ed really kind of took him under his wing. And, that older, mature sort of experienced veteran, taking care of this young guy that is sort of, in a lot of aspects, my dad was a bonus baby, signed out of college, and he went immediately to AAA. That's what these guys, the Giants brass, thought of him.
Wow.
So, which is a big deal back in those days, because when Dad played, they had not just AAA, AA, and single A, but they had D-ball, C-ball, D-ball. Oh, there was all kinds of minor league clubs all over the country, scattered throughout the United States.
Right.
So to immediately go to the next step before the major leagues, he had some ability, obviously. He had some skill and talent, and they stuck him in Tacoma in the Pacific Coast League. he struggled a little bit there. And then the following year, they put him in A-ball back in the Penn League. I think it was the Penn League they called it back then. Or back east, he was in Springfield, Massachusetts. And
I remember that league, and I'll bet his manager was Charlie Fox, if I'm not mistaken.
And I want to say it was. I want to say that it was because Charlie, of course, was a dear family friend of ours, as was Herman.
A friend of mine too. I don't know if you know that. I
didn't know that, but he lived down on the peninsula for a long, long time. Anyway, so Dad, and that was good. That was good for Dad because now Dad was working and playing with guys that eventually got, like McCovey and Marisol. These guys were all down on that club. They all won these championships as they went through their system. So the next year they went back to Tacoma, and then he was eventually called up to the major leagues. And when he got called up, Bailey was catching for him, and Ed just kind of saw the promise in my father and his intelligence and his ability, all of those things to be a good major league catcher. And it was really like you said, the right time at the right place, and developed basically those first couple of years in the major leagues into a pretty good, solid catcher.
Darn right. And had one of those two catchers, your dad or Ed Bailey, been a right-handed hitter, I think the Giants would have done considerably better in the years between 61 and, say, 65. Because the Giants came up against guys like Padres and Koufax, and I think Simmons. There's a lot of guys in the league, tough left-handers.
Yeah.
That
you're exactly right. And if they were able to complement each other in terms of right-handed and left-handed, that kind of
balance, that would have been a much stronger team.
Now that kind of funnels us into this part of our conversation. They were being managed by Alvin Dark.
Yes.
And, before the show tonight.
When I was a kid growing up, he was the New York Giants shortstop, 1951, when I went to my first game with my grandfather, before Willie was called up. And then after, when they reconfigured the team, Eddie Stanky played second, and Alvin Dark played short. And I got to meet him years later, and he was I would just say he was a complicated person, given where he grew up and his experiences, which weren't much different in a lot of ways than your dad's experience. He was a football hero at LSU. I can't think of who he beat out. He beat out some All-American football player at LSU back then. At one time, he was as good as anybody playing college football. And we talked a little off the air. I'm hoping that you can give me some memories of Alvin Dark and maybe tell us all something we don't know. And I just want to say Rex Hudler was the guy we were talking about. That
right, Rex Hudler. Sure.
Rex Hudler. I really liked Rex. He was an overachiever, and I have a very big soft spot in my heart for the Angels, and he did them right for a long time. But give me some Alvin Dark stuff that you can enlighten us all with.
Well, of course, I was graced by Alvin's presence as an infant. So I have those not really great early memories, but as I got a little bit older, 3-4 years old, I remember Alvin, and he always sort of had that demeanor of being a colonel in the Army. And he had the great respect of his players. The guys loved playing for him.
Yeah.
And Alvin was a very devout Christian, very, very devout. And so he was very structured and deliberate and swayed in certain ways in terms of behaviors, etc. Alvin.
Right. Words that he would use and old homilies that he would bring up that made him sound particularly unenlightened.
Well, in a lot of ways, yeah. And I'm not here. I loved Alvin Dark. I love him today. He did a lot for me as far as my career because he was involved in me getting to the White Sox from the Orioles. He was their director of minor league development and very in tune with the White Sox organization as far as general managers, et cetera, and the front office staff. So Alvin, over the years, saw me play, and liked what he saw. We were very similar in terms of playing ability with middle infielders with pretty good speed. I was a switch hitter. He was not, but he took a liking to me. As a guy, as a person for one, and as a ball player for two. So, I'm grateful for that. But I do know Alvin had his demons. And, I don't think that this is a place to really talk about those things. But I'll tell you what, Alvin Dark, was a great manager. He was a good baseball player. And those are the things that I can say about him, and he was a big part of my life when I was younger. So, but I do know that Dad had great regard and great respect for him as well. He loved playing for him. He spoke very highly of him. And just like all of us, we can make some bad choices and decisions in our lifetime. Alvin was shrouded by a particular choice, a lifestyle choice that he made. And that sort of put a little bit of a separation between my father and Alvin. But, Alvin and I, until the day Alvin died, we always had a very, a good relationship, a mutual respect. He certainly loved my father. But my dad expressed his disappointment by a particular choice that Alvin had made, earlier.
Right. With this was a extramarital thing. Is that what we're?
Yeah, exactly. And to go around and speak of his ethics and morals, but to be living sort of a second life, kind of like that.
Yes, there was a hypocrisy, if you will, that couldn't be denied.
Right, and Dad told me he had that kind of relationship with Alvin that, he actually went to him and he said, Alvin, you got to stop doing this because you're losing my respect and the respect of of our players. Dad had an innate ability to be a leader. He was the team's catcher, so he felt it his due to sort of lead by example. And he felt if his manager wasn't going to play by those same rules, it was time for him to stand up and say something about it. And he did. And he lost some respect for Alvin because even after that conversation, Alvin continued to live sort of, quietly in that situation. And it disappointed my father because I know he loved Alvin and he had great respect for him with the exception of that particular, issue.
Right. Yeah, what can you say? We're all human beings. We're gray. Nobody is all bad, all good. If you could just cop to what you are, it's the hypocrisy that got you. If you could have just said, yeah, this is who I am, and
well, yeah, exactly. My mantra is, we all live in a glass house. We can all be criticized. We could all be judged or whatever by our fellow human beings. Fine. But if you're not transparent, I think that leads to greater discredibility. Throw out those errors and those defects of character that you already have. It's okay. I'm going to embrace you no matter what. I'm going to love you no matter what. Nobody is perfect. But when we try to cover those things up because they think it's going to make us look better or appear to be to create an image that is not true, that's the damaging thing. That's truly damaging.
Did your dad ever consider managing, and was he ever approached to be a manager?
Well, when Dad ultimately was fired by the Giants, he too went to the White Sox. I went there, and then they signed him to be the Double-A manager, and he was down in Birmingham, Alabama. And about a month and a half into his stint down there, Alvin had hired him. Alvin had put together an incredible staff of minor league guys. I mean, all the ex-big leaguers, Dick Allen, Jose Cardinal, Duke Sims, Bob Bailey, Rico Petrocelli. The list can go on. The list goes on. He put together an incredible minor league staff.
Right.
And very quickly, 6 weeks into that season, Tony La Russa got fired. They brought in Fregosi to manage, and ownership removed Hawk Harrelson out of the general manager spot and put him back in the broadcast booth because they realized he wasn't general manager material. And they brought my dad up from the Double-A club to take over as the interim general manager. So that's sort of, but Dad absolutely loved managing. And I think, in all honesty, just from my perspective, I think my dad would have been best suited to be a field manager. And not, although he was an okay executive, and I think that some of his abilities were restricted by Bob Lurie and the financials, at the time of the San Francisco Giants. I think that for the most part, he was a pretty good general manager. Was he the best? Absolutely not. Did he have the same resources that the Giants have today? Not even close. But I think my dad's greatest gift was to manage and lead a club, just like you see a lot of great catchers managing today in the big leagues, and even in the minor leagues, guys that caught are managing. They have a special ability to kind of see all areas and facets of the game itself, and they for whatever reason command a lot of respect from their peers. And I think Dad would have been a really good major league manager. I really do.
And he would have ended up on the DeRocher tree of folks who, down the line, either played for DeRocher or played for someone who did play for DeRocher. In this case, Alvin Dark. Leo DeRocher sent about 12 managers to the big leagues. So,
he did. And, my dad was,
been a branch.
Directly affected by Leo DeRocher, directly affected by it. Leo was not managing when my dad finally got up to the big league, but Leo was around, and he had a great effect upon my dad.
Yeah, wow. These names are terrific. These names. Let me take a second, Tim, and we, the bulk of our audience, obviously, are Giant lovers, apologists, ex-lovers, this, that, and the other thing. I have to take the San Francisco Giants as a group, the fans as a group, to task. They are booing Matt Cain of late, who is just probably at the end of it. Let's face it.
Yeah. Well, and I agree. I already know where you're going with this, because one thing that I'm separate from is the average casual fan of the Giants or any other baseball club. I have a greater understanding, much more depth and width than the guy that, and his wife or girlfriend that goes to see a ball game on a weekend. And, you get the boo birds.
How do you boo a guy who took you to three titles? I don't understand.
Well, all that is absolute pure ignorance. And they don't, that's what they don't get. They don't understand the sport. They don't understand that and he's a human being too. That stuff affects him. You don't think he's going through a psychological barrage right now because of the way he's performing, and maybe coming to the realization that he just isn't going to be a major league pitcher anymore. That's got to be devastating for a guy. But shame on the fans, exactly, because they do not get it. And but there are a much smaller percentage of fans that understand it, and they do know the game. One thing I will say is there's a whole new breed of Giants fans that there were even in the 90s and earlier than that. Because
is it the corporate situation that the Giants are in with the ballpark? Is it most tickets are bought and sold corporately and given away as business?
I don't think that at all. What I think it is, Ralph, is regardless of who is going to be supporting the club as far as the fans, if it's a corporate thing or individuals, you have a different generation of fans today. And it's just like our culture that we live in. We want it right now, and we want perfection. No questions, no ifs, ands, or buts. You've got to be this or you're a bum. And the expectations they put so much higher expectations on other people than themselves, because if we were to walk into their house and into their closet, it would be really shaming to them. It would be. But that being what it is, so you've got, let's say, that generation of fans that have experienced now 3 championships in 6 seasons in a new ballpark, where they've sold out 440 consecutive ball games or whatever, something astronomical like that. So you're getting, not to mention, the fan base is different and bigger and broader today because you have a lot of new implants coming to the Bay Area, i.e. with, their job situation. There's a lot of the high-tech patrons out there now. They're very intelligent, but they're very impatient and they're very critical also. So it's a different breed of fan. It's a different type. We're not talking about the 87 fan. We're talking about the 2016 Giant fan. So there was a difference in just the mentality of the individual that went to the ball game. They booed a lot at Candlestick Park. You doggone right. They booed Johnny LeMaster worse than anybody. But
there's a difference. You can't boo a guy who was solid for 3 years, who is going through a change that is going to put him as a civilian. And anybody who's ever strapped it on doesn't want to strap it off. There's something about playing a little boy's game, and he's being punished because obviously he's making a whole bunch of more money than he's earning, but the system itself causes people to be rewarded for what they did as opposed to what they're doing. So you can't blame him for the system. He's taking advantage of the system. And to boo a guy who put it out there, who they called the horse, who put the team on his back for weeks at a time, for years at a time, give me a break.
Absolutely.
I had a kid and took him to the game, and he was booing. I'd take his ass home. I'd say, hey, you're missing it. Go out and play a little league and see what it's like to even be scouted, let alone achieve what you achieved. And you boo this guy? I couldn't. That really saddened me.
It is.
I'm hearing these boos on the radio. I said, wait a minute, that's wrong. And yes, they booed LeMaster. They had a right. Every fan has a right to express themselves. But it was an inning. He was just blowing up, and I think it might have been I thought at the time this could be his last game,
and Bochy still thinks that he has something left. And you know what? Who am I to argue with Bruce Bochy?
Right.
And these guys see him every day. They interact on a daily basis, on a very personal basis.
They're not giving up on it. Bochy and Righetti aren't giving up on him. He's obviously putting the effort in. If it was something like you boo a guy who doesn't run to first base, you
Sure.
know, you boo, or doesn't run it out, or doesn't dive to keep a ball in the infield,
or shows up 10 minutes before game time and misses batting practice and has an attitude issue or something of that nature. Matt Cain isn't like that. And you know what? The one thing I love about the Giants, as opposed to maybe some other organizations, i.e. the Yankees, because they've shown a pattern. They have the Giants don't have this knee-jerk thing. They don't panic. They have everything set in place. They have a method to their madness. They have an approach that is patient. It's forgiving. It's understanding, and they're not going to just fly off the handle and do something obscure and that makes no sense. Matt Cain is having some issues right now. Do I think Matt Cain can kind of rectify this thing? I don't know. I don't get to see him throw every time he's out there. I don't get to see what's going on. I do know he's leaving a lot of stuff up. I know that he's lost a lot of velocity. I know he's had some elbow issues. He's had a couple surgeries over the last year and a half. I get that. But is it time to go ahead and close the barn door on him? I don't know. And, the guys that see him and the powers that be, i.e. the Bochy's and the Righettis and the Bobby Evanses and the Sabians, those guys know a lot more than I do. Absolutely. And I'm going to trust what they think and how they handle this far more than whatever my criticism is. And I'm certainly overlooking any common, ordinary fan. Because all they do is they only operate on emotion. They have no understanding of what's involved in playing this sport on a day-to-day. They have no idea. They have no clue. And so what they're going to do, and if the guy next to him is booing, then he's going to start booing. It's contagious.
Yeah, it's like the wave or whatever the hell it is. Everybody gets up.
Sure. Sure. So, I mean, do I think the Giants need a little help in their fourth and fifth starter slots? Yeah, I do. But you know what? They're in first place. That one ball game doesn't. They gave up 13 runs in one inning. Big deal. You know what the best thing about baseball is? You get to play the next day. And what did they do? They went out and won. And then they struggled and they fought for a 2-1 victory today through 13 innings. These guys are professionals. And they lay it all out there. They lay it all out there because you know what? They want to win way more than the fan does, and the fan doesn't get that. These guys have to these guys every day have to look in Righetti Bochy's eyes every single day, and Ron Wotus. And you're not blowing things by these guys. You have to play. These coaches are known as players' coaches. That means they'll identify with the players, and they will stand up for the player, but they also know that they're not going to be taking advantage of the player by the player. Taking advantage and that's why,
the player.
Okay, and perfect example of that, because I think that the Giants have a lot more heart than they have superstardom. That's why the Giants are great, because they have a collection of guys that know how to play the game, but there isn't one particular person on that club that's a superstar. They're all stars in their own right, but they don't have a Bonds anymore. They don't have, they have a collection of really great baseball players. I'm going to tell you what, when you have,
Pence, I think Pence makes, he is just a motor, and he keeps them. When he's in there and going well, that helps quite a bit. But that play Panic made tonight in the top of the 13th inning, that backhanded play to his right and flipping the ball behind his head to get the third out, force out at second base, so that allowed them to get to the bottom of the 13th and win the game. They play that way because
they play that way for each other themselves because they have the pride. They play that way for their teammates, and they play that way for their coaching and their ownership.
And I'm going to give Bochy a little kudos to make the move to put Pagan batting ninth as opposed to the pitcher and have two leadoff men coming up in a row really solidifies them. And
I think that's a brilliant move. It's an incredibly brilliant move. He's blessed with two leadoff guys that are pretty darn good ball players. He's moved one very capable center fielder over to left who's done a remarkable job. He's got a leg issue right now, and he'll be back in a few days. But Pagani, I think, was leading the club in hitting and hitting out of that 9-hole. Bochy he's no slouch.
Bochy's making a move that is certainly not conventional. It's been made before. People have been doing it for a couple of years around the league. But I remember listening to him. He was asked about it in pregame shows and this, that. He says, well, I'm considering it, and they'll do it, and I'm studying it. He wasn't just giving it mouth service. He did consider it. He did try it, and it's working. And for
exactly.
15-year Major League manager who, with all the success, you could say, hey, I'm doing it the way I'm doing it. We won 3 times. I'll bat the pitch at ninth, thank you. No. That's called progression. That's a Bernie Sanders thing.
Right back to the fan. Trust the process. Listen, fan, ordinary, average Joe, guy that likes to go to a few games, a half a dozen games a year. He has a few too many beers. He likes to yell and scream. He likes to touch fair balls that are in play. Those guys that go out to the ball yard and are overcritical, and they played on their high school team, all those guys, listen up. Trust the process. These guys are professionals. They know what they're doing. Go and enjoy the game, because the Giants are putting a product out there that we're so fortunate to be able to witness on a day in and day out basis. Just take a breath, relax, sit back, and watch the San Francisco Giants, because you know what? They're going to win this division this year, and they're very slowly starting to get that gel. And so they gave up 15 runs in an inning. That stuff happens. It happens. This is the game of baseball. Stuff happens all the time. Oddities, rarities, crazy stuff. But if you know that as a fan, and you have been observing the game for as long as you have been alive, you will acknowledge that. You will know that. Watch these Giants. Watch them.
And have some appreciation for 3 wins in your lifetime, let alone for 3 wins in 6 years. In your lifetime. It took me, the Giants won in 54. From a Giants standpoint, I became a Met fan, and the Mets won before, the Mets were born and won again before the Giants ever won again.
Right.
And I had to watch the Giants against another team that I liked, the Angels, and I'm going, whoa, isn't this, the baseball gods spitting on my face a little bit. You can't win for losing with this one. And it took years after that, and you better take a deep breath, because fans better take a deep breath. It could be a long time. That's how baseball is. It's secular. You never know. And
that's why I get really frustrated with some of these fans and their criticisms, because they have no idea what in the world they're even talking about. They don't. Right. They don't have a clue. And I try my best to ignore them. I was blessed. I was fortunate to go up a couple weekends ago to do a service in Jimmy Davenport's memory. The Giants family put together a beautiful little function and everything, a second sort of memorial for him at the ballpark. That was just, it was exclusive. There were only a certain amount of people that were invited. It wasn't open to, it was the Giants family. But afterwards, we had some time before the game, and then we went and sat down and watched the game. But you run into people. People come up to you. They say stuff that is just absurd. I just don't.
Right.
and I just have I do my best to be kind and acknowledge them, but underneath my exterior, I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Are you really?
You don't have to be in a ballpark for it. If you go on a BART ride, 48% of the people are going to vote for the Republican candidate. So you're brushing arms with guys. Hey, I'm a Trump fan. You know, I would have rather had Cruz because what?
What a bunch of knuckleheads they are. Well, I'm glad I'm involved in baseball and not politics. I'll tell you that. And if I'm going to do a kudos or a shout out to anybody, it's Gary Johnson for president 2016. He's the Libertarian candidate. I know that just makes the hair on the back of your neck rise.
No, it doesn't. I can't be classified as anything politically. I think the system is broken. I think Democrats and Republicans are pretty much the same, and I think any time there's a system where a candidate or a politician or an elected official is indebted to big business, Monsanto's and all these people are taking money for it, including Bernie taking money from the gun lobbyists, which really stuck in my craw for a lot of reasons. And he's my man, because he's the man that I think is different in the sense that he isn't really fundamentally indebted, and he's not a millionaire or a billionaire. And I don't think.
And he's really not he's not. Yeah, I mean, he was running for the Democratic nod, but he's really not even a Democrat.
No, he's an independent, and the DNC has messed with him so much that I think they can afford to split it up. And I think if there was a three-way battle between Hillary, Trump, and Bernie would win hands down. Is that too much to risk because of Supreme Court nominees? That's another thing. That's another story. But this is a baseball show, so Timmy, I want you to take two and hit to right.
Okay, and that's exactly what I'm gonna do.
Thanks, man. This is a pleasure. I just so much enjoy it. He's been putting us off, but next week, Vida Blue.
Yeah, Biden's going to be our guest next week, Ralph, and I'm really looking forward to that because, again, before the show tonight, folks, we talked a little bit about our preponderance to speak mostly about the Giants, and we kind of get it, that we understand it. That's where my connection is, of course, and everything. But what we do need to pay some homage to the green and gold across the bay, the Oakland Athletics. We're going to have Vida on. We're going to talk a little bit about his...
On the road, we're going to have Vasu back. He was on the other day, and he spends a lot of quality A's time, and he's going to come in on a regular basis and let us know what's happening. I'm really making an effort to think long-term and including the A's more in Bay Area baseball, past, present, and future. And
I do, too. My conscience is... a little waning there too, Ralph. I do want to. I want to pay the proper respect to those guys over there because they're a very classy organization and they're out there every day trying to do the same thing the Giants are doing, and that's win.
Right. And I want to wrap it up like we started it by paying homage to our moms and. Tell you that my mom in 1939 went to the game where Lou Gehrig stood up and proclaimed himself as the luckiest man in the world. She was 19 years old, and she also sat with me when I came home from school in 1956 and watched Don Lawson through the last few innings of Don Lawson throwing a perfect game in the World Series. And I remember we looked at each other when Yogi went out there and jumped into his arms, and we went, wow. And I was 10 years old. And so it's nice to have a baseball moment with Mom. And, your mom, again.
Yeah, she was carrying me in the 62 series, and then after I was born, I hit the ground running. She got me to every kind of baseball game and function that you could imagine up until my 16th year of life. God bless you, Mom, and all mothers out there. Thank you for doing the things that you did to turn us into the men that we are today.
Absolutely. Love you, Timmy boy. We'll talk to you next week.
All right. Love you, Ralphie, and be well, everybody. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. We'll talk soon. Adios. We're back. Bay Area Baseball, past, present, and future. My host, my co-host, but he's really the host, Timmy Haller. How are you, my man?
Hey, Ralph. How are you doing? It's good to be on. I'm doing well. Now, I know we have a very special guest this evening, Ralph.
Yes, we do. We'll get to it, and I'll lead you into the introduction. He is the son of former Major League player Jimmy Davenport, the late Jimmy Davenport, who you and I, Timmy, have been mourning for the past 2 or 3 months, his passing. And first thing I want to do is express my condolences to you, Gary Davenport, who and your family. My condolences.
Thanks, Ralph. I really appreciate it. Dad had quite a legacy with the Giants, and I can't even begin to explain how much he meant to our family. So, yeah, I really appreciate it.
Well, how much he meant to the entire extended Giant family, and it's just anyone's life. Passing of anyone is tragic, but he left such an indelible force. And what I will always take to mind, he was absolutely colorblind. It mattered not the color of your skin or your nationality. And you could say, well, who wouldn't be? But his upbringing was very Southern. So he's atypical of what you would expect from a Southern gentleman. Would you elaborate on that, Gary?
I can tell you, Dad grew up in the South. He went to school at Thompson High School there in Alabama. That went on to, he was supposed to go to Alabama, but they didn't take married people at the time. So what happened was he ended up going to Mississippi Southern and playing football and baseball there. But so he was from the South the whole time, brought up in the South. But you talk to any of Dad's teammates, and I'm talking about Orlando Cepeda and Pagan or Alou, and then McCovey, and they would Mays, and they would all tell you that Dad was just a great teammate, and and they all kind of hung out together, and they were a family.
And the whole they were a family, which included the kids, and you two both grew up together in the Bay Area. So how cool was that you both ended up playing ball? And what were your experiences like and your memories of each other like, guys?
You couldn't ask for a better childhood. Growing up in a baseball family, we had the privilege, which we didn't really, know or understand at the time, being able to go to the park and going into the clubhouse. And, Mike Murphy was, running the clubhouse with Eddie Logan at the time. And they really, made it a family situation. And, our family and the Bonses and the Howlers, and we were all together. And, it was a different time, too. It was a time where, the players actually did things together. They, they hung out together after. They got together on off days and, planned trips and stuff together. So I think it's probably a little different than it is nowadays. But what a great experience it was to grow up.
Did your careers coincide, or who was older?
I was older. What?
Gary's a lot older than I am.
Thank you, Timmy.
Well, let's put things into perspective. If Gary's a lot older than you, I'm a lot older than Methuselah.
You're Father Time, Ralph. You're Father Time.
Indeed, and proud to be it. It's a privilege to be old. A lot of people don't, not elderly. Elderly sucks, big time. But old is great as long as you have your memories and as long as you can get around and you're not dependent and all that stuff. Old is great. It's not everybody gets to live it. So.
And in all seriousness, Gary's only 4 years older than I am. And so it was special for me because I got to, witness and observe him. And I looked up to Gary. I kind of idolized him a little bit. I kind of wanted to, when he was around, I wanted to be around him. I just enjoyed his company. He was always welcoming and loving and at that, with an age gap of only 4 years, there's still a pretty good divide in terms of experience, et cetera. But, Gary was always awesome, as he is today. But when we were growing up and playing and everything, I always looked to him. I really did.
Oh, nice.
Wow,
nice
I don't know
that you remain friends these years later. Because I know Gary doesn't have nice things to say about you, Tim. That's what surprises me.
Well, and that's okay. I'm used to it.
That's not true.
I know.
It was like the little brother that I never had.
Oh, very cool. Tell me, Gary, about what brought you into coaching. You coached in the minors, and was it you or was it your brother that went to Italy?
That was me. Yeah, I was.
That was you.
Yeah. After I was done playing baseball here, I had an opportunity to, in fact, I first went, I had a friend from college that was in South Africa, Cape Town, and he was talking about how he'd go down there for the summer and play ball and, how great it was. And so I thought it would be a good time to use my baseball to travel around the world a little bit. So I ended up going to Cape Town, South Africa for 7 months. And then I went right from there to Italy, and I was right outside of Rome. It was down in a little beach town called Nettuno. And actually the city was called Nettuno, the city of baseball. And the military back in World War II kind of brought bats and balls and gloves and kind of introduced it to the Italians, and it took off. So I ended up being there for 17 years, actually, in
Whoa.
2000. Yeah, a long time.
Yeah, a long time. That's shows you how long it's been since you and I knew each other, probably around 30 years ago in Salem, Oregon, when you were coaching for the Giants. Do you remember who was managing that Salem, Oregon team?
When I think when I saw you in Salem, that was when I already came back from Italy. And that was in 2000, let's see, what year was that? 2010? 2011. And I was managing the team at that time.
Oh, okay. That must have been it. Gary, you're still in baseball?
Yes. This is my 13th year with the Giants. And currently, I've done anywhere from, I was hitting coach in San Jose for about 8 years, a double-A hitting guy for a couple of years, and that's when they were in Connecticut, Norwich.
Right.
And then I managed the Salem team for 2 years. That's the rookie team. Last year I was the roving infield instructor, and this year I'm a roving instructor, which I can do hitting, infield, outfield, base running, kind of wherever they need me to help out.
Nice. Which administration hired you initially? Was it Al Rosen's administration?
No, it was Brian Sabian.
Oh, okay.
In fact, Dad came over in 2001 to help me manage the Olympic team. It was a non-Olympic year, but we had like 3 tournaments, so we were talking about, baseball and everything, and then kind of mentioned, I mentioned something to Brian about, being a scout over in, internationally, kind of cut down the distance of some of those guys that have to travel. And he thought it was a good idea, and then it never kind of came about. But then in that year, something happened to the hitting guy, and it was FP Santangelo in San Jose. His wife got in some kind of an accident. So they asked me to come and to fill in. So I came over and got the job, and that was in 2004, and I've been there ever since.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Timmy.
Yes.
Talk about what you guys talk about when you reminisce about those days.
Oh, Gary and I speak of so many different things. The memories, of course, first and foremost, of growing up with, in that clubhouse when we were young. And then, we share stories about our college days and high school playing days. Gary went to San Carlos High School, and I went to San Mateo, and then Gary went on to play at the Jesuit school down in Santa Clara University, or University of Santa Clara. And I even went down there a couple of times to watch him play, when he was at college there. It seems that, and I've noticed this, and it's just the way it is. My memory seems to be a little bit sharper, and that's just because I was younger and I didn't have the same activities schedule as Gary did. He was older, and he was pursuing at that time, getting an opportunity to play professionally. It hasn't been until the last several years that he and I have really kind of rebonded. And it's not that we didn't have a closeness, but it seems like over the last probably 6 years or so, he and I have been even closer. When I moved back up to the Bay Area a few years back, we reconnected again, and I would go and bother his mom and dad at their house, and I even ran into Gary a couple of times at a batting cage in Belmont, and Gary and I sort of reconnected there. We've seen each other a couple of occasions in spring training over the years, Gary and his dad. We share everything from family get-togethers that we did together, his sister's wedding, to playing. We never actually got a chance to play together, which would have been awesome. But I was sort of a fan of his, just kind of from the outside looking in. And now we have this abundance, this infinite amount of memories and everything to share. We've spent a lot of time most recently, talking about our fathers, which is pretty natural.
Yeah. Well, with that in mind, let me ask you this. I'll ask you both this. Your dad, Gary, was a terrific fielding third baseman. He really was super. Why do you suppose it was that he didn't get the publicity for his fielding that some of the, Brooks Robinson, Clete Boyer, they were great. Davy was just as good. I'm a little prejudiced. I was a New York Giant fan. I followed them over here. That's the one question. And the second question will be my last one, is do you think that he should have at one time or another played shortstop when, with all due respect to Jose Pagan, he was like Rafael Santana in the sense that he was very solid, enough for them to win with. But your dad was that good defensively. I think he should have been a big league shortstop. Was that ever brought up in the household? Did he ever, did anybody ever talk about that back then?
I mean, there was periods where he actually did play.
Right, he did.
Second base. When Jim Ray Hart kind of came onto the scene, and, he was a big hitting third baseman, and, Dad played some shortstop, a few games. He was more like, kind of went into a utility role a little bit at that point. And that was kind of Rick.
Yeah, but before that, earlier on, and he did, like in '62, he did play a little second base against left-handed pitchers for Hiller when they'd bring Keene in, and Keene played third, and so they juggled it around. I thought they should have used him more at short over the years, and I wondered whether or not that was ever an issue. That's all.
He'd be the first guy to say that, he was lucky he was even on the team. He's always talking about
a humble guy, right?
Oh, super humble. And, if there was one word that comes into mind, it is humble. And that's who Dad was. And he said he was fortunate enough to be on a team that could afford to have a good fielding third baseman. And, they had the Mazes, the McCoveys, and, the Cepedas and the Luz. I mean, they have a really good hitting team. So
right,
but
you have to have balance on some level, and he was terrific. So that's been something I've thought about for a long time.
He did a lot of
the other question: many of the stars that were developed right after the Giant, like your dad included, both of your dads included, came up right after the Giants moved to San Francisco. The Giants, before they moved from New York, the last year or so, especially '57, they were horrible. They had all these guys that they were waiting to develop. Cepeda came up early on, Kirkland, Daddy Wags, all these guys, all products of the Giant farm system. Do you think they were held back deliberately? Do you think that they were ready, and McCovey included? He was in that system. Could have they come up, and was it just something they didn't want to do when they were moving, crying poor mouth, this, that, or the other thing? Was that ever discussed?
Not really. I mean, I think it's all about timing. And, look at even the Giants now. There was a time when, the minor leagues really didn't feed it, any players really into the system. And then all of a sudden you start getting, Lipscomb kind of comes through, and then, Kane, and then Pablo. And there wasn't, like I said, there wasn't a position player for years. But now the whole infield catching, I mean, it's all homegrown players from the minor leagues. Well, that's kind of what happened, I think, with the Giants at the same time. They were kind of, the older group was kind of coming out, and this new group was coming in. And Dad just happened to be part of that new generation.
Well, it was an exciting, you were just a kid. Both of you were just kids, but it's a very, very exciting time. And the interesting thing was that all Al Dark managing and all the coaches were all coaches from the great teams when they were of 1954, for instance. They brought the entire coaching staff out from New York, and they brought Willie out. And but I was left in New York for a long time, so I got to follow them long distance and stayed with them until the Mets were born. And what can I tell you? But they're still my second favorite.
Hey, Ralph, I got a question for you.
Yes.
So how did it feel that the Giants left town and you had to stay behind? What did that feel like?
It was horrible. I was 11 years old. It really wasn't fun. It wasn't good for the city. It wasn't good for kids. It wasn't good for baseball. and it could have been done differently. Could have waited a while. San Francisco, LA would have had expansion teams, and that Branch Rickey was forcing the issue with the Continental League. So the Mets were born. The issue would have been forced somewhere along the line. It really was for a kid. And in New York, there's a passion when you follow your team. That it's incredible. You're either a Dodger fan, a Giant fan, a Yankee fan, and I was not only a Giant fan, but the big rivalry was the Dodgers. So naturally, we appreciate the teams coming in. Aaron coming in with the Braves, Frank Robinson coming in. We lost all those guys in their prime. It wasn't good. And the Mets are great. It came in by that time I was like 16, and it was difficult times. I hope that explains it.
I know it was a time when I really looked up to the players as heroes, and I even kind of worshipped the players. And I don't know if it's as much like that nowadays, but I know back in those days it really was, and it had to be hard for the town to lose.
Yeah. Both the borough of Brooklyn was crushed. There was so much identity with the Dodgers, and as I look back, you see all Facebook and all social media and all the sites. Brooklyn Dodger nostalgia runs much more rampant throughout the nation than the New York Giant nostalgia. It's alive. There are clubs and meetings and this, that, and the other thing. But there was a fervency about following the Dodgers back in those days that I think a lot of it was based on the cozy ballpark. The borough itself was unique in so many different ways. But things are different. Thank God they got the ballpark. You tell me about both of you guys going out there. What was the coldest night you experienced at Candlestick? Because a cold night at AT&T Park is a warm night at Candlestick Park. So individually, what did you guys experience? Timmy first.
Well, I had the opportunity to work with Mike Murphy, so I did a lot of stuff on the field, bat boy and ball boy, and for a good stretch of time, I was the ball boy down the right field line, and I sat out on a stool, just past first base along the wall, right near home plate of the bullpen. Right. And you know what? Every night was cold. I don't think there was one particular night that stood out other than this one evening. This eerie, just incredible fog rolled down over the point on the third base side and over the shell of the stadium. And for a while, and it seemed like an eternity for me, being young, it seemed like for hours this fog came and just slowly came into the ballpark. And for a while there was visibility of maybe 60 feet. Or it appeared that way to me. It was that thick. But the winds and the cold and the moisture, I was always bundled up. I was always wearing long johns underneath the uniform pants. So they were all equally pretty cool. That's for darn sure.
Yeah. How about yourself, Gary? Anything that stands out?
Well, for me, all I can imagine is the pitchers down in the bullpen with those big, long jackets, those big, thick jackets on that they had when they were
right.
And it was freezing. And Dad always talked about how other teams would come in, and it was a huge advantage for the San Francisco Giants to play there in Candlestick because the other players wanted to come in and get out of there as quick as they could. So, I mean, and I know, I think in the visiting dugout, they didn't have a heater in that one. They left it cold, so I know they had a heater in the Giants dugout. But it was miserable, and, I mean, you'd get 3,500 people, diehards standing there watching the game and all bundled up in the stands, and you couldn't get enough blankets and jackets and hats on. I mean, it went right through to your bone.
Okay. I'm just gonna piggyback on that too. Early on when Dad was the bullpen coach, they spent a lot. He was down there all the time, but they would spend a lot of their time inside the tunnel entrance because they didn't want to sit out in that weather. And they had space heaters underneath the tunnel there, and they would sit in there and they would goof around, play cards, and it was quite a scene with that group of guys. But I remember there were a few right fielders that if they weren't going to be up that inning, they would just run over into that tunnel and stay there for the 3 outs until they went back out to play again. And it was much warmer inside that tunnel than it was in their dugout, that's for sure.
Wow, good memory of that. Gary, while we have you, give us a couple of prospects who are overachievers and who we would like to root for, because when they make it, it'll be for the right reasons.
Well, I mean, in the minor leagues right now?
What's coming up through the grapevine? We're going to write it. We're going to write them down and really particularly follow these guys and root for them, because I want guys we can root for the right reasons. You don't have to tell me what those reasons are, but choose a couple of guys coming up that you really like, who are good and have because to me, at a professional level, the talent is very, very evenly distributed. So much of it is in the head. And tell me who's got a good head on their shoulders, if you would.
Well, I know you've heard this name already, but Arroyo for his age, he's 20 years old, and he's playing Double-A right now, and he's high on the charts right now for the Giants. And you're talking about having a good head and a good baseball sense, and even this kid, he really gets into the history part of the game, and he can tell you all kinds of stats on old-time players, and, I mean, he really has a love for the game, but the one kid that comes to mind more than anybody is Duffy, who came through our organization just recently. I mean, Dad, I hear him say all the time, he goes, if you were to tell me that Duffy was going to be our number 3 hitter and play third base, he goes, I would have laughed. He goes, he wasn't even supposed to make that team. So, I mean, you're talking about an overachiever. He's probably the number 1 kid, and it couldn't happen to a better kid too, because but it shows you that there's a lot more to the numbers in the minor leagues than just their batting average and the home runs, the RBIs. It's what they got inside, and the Panics and the Posies and the Duffys and the Belts. I mean, those guys are like mentally tough. They just don't give up, and they're really persistent, and I think that's what makes the difference between some of the kids in the minor leagues and the guys that make it to the big leagues. Is it's not the talent. They all can throw hard. They all can hit the ball hard. They've got good hands, but the ones that make it it seems like the ones that are mentally tough. They got maybe more passion, where they put more effort and work into it, and it seems like that work pays off, and they seem like to be the ones that make it up to the big club.
And the same goes with coaching, am I right? From that standpoint, the minor league coaches and evaluators, does that ring true? Are the hardest working scouts the one that move up the fastest, that get promoted the fastest, to get the areas? Is it a matter of hard work on that level?
Oh, it definitely doesn't hurt. I mean, sometimes it is different. It just with the scouting department, you know, it might be being at the right place at the right time, or you know, maybe you see something that somebody else doesn't see, or you can, you know, see something that you can maybe we know we can fix and make that player a better player. But does he work hard? I mean, him working hard, is it going to more games, or is it, you know, maybe having a better eye than maybe somebody else?
Well, working hard or working smart, knowing which games to go to, and so, that kind of thing.
Well,
I confused this guy. I wanted to dwell on the player development aspect of it, the minor league coaches. You shouldn't have used the terminology scouting for that, because I'm more interested in this conversation in what goes into guys. Like, I use an example, Ron Wotus. Started in the same Northwest League with the Giants way back, and guys come up, and guys who becomes big league coaches. What's that about? Why hasn't Wotus, for instance, gotten a chance as a manager after all these years being a bench coach? All these things. It's probably all simply subjective in any way, but I'd like to hear it from somebody in the biz.
I mean, you know, I can't speak for Ron, but I could imagine, why would you ever want to leave the Giants? I mean, he's got 3 World Series with the Giants. He came through as a coach, manager in the minor leagues. He's been with the big club for, you know, 14, 15 years, maybe more.
Right.
I mean, it becomes family at a certain point, and it's like, well, you're going to leave your family and, you know, for something that might last a year or two. So, you know, be careful what you wish for sometimes, or, you know, the grass maybe seems a little greener sometimes, but, you know, these guys.
Good example of that may be UL Washington on the other side of the bay, who left and managed Texas for a while and was successful to a point, and now is back as an infield coach, and he's probably one of the greatest infield coaches of all time. So it could be the Peter principle involved, and it could be a lot of things.
Oh, yeah, I mean, with Washington, you know, sometimes you know when it's time to move on, or maybe maybe he wanted to manage. I mean, maybe he didn't want to be just an infield guy. And organizations will never hold those guys back. If they're offered a job in another organization at a higher level job, like, you know, from coach to a manager,
of course.
The teams won't get in your way. They never do. They just wish you the best.
Absolutely. I just thought Wotus had aspirations and was going to be one, and he may yet be. And he may, if and when Bochy retires, he may take over at that point. So, and proving the idea that patience is a virtue.
Take this into account too, guys. You know, when you're talking about managing at the major league level, you take that job, you're going to eventually get fired. We know that. And there's not a whole lot of job security when you're a manager. Now, of course, Bochy is an exception to that. But if I'm a guy that's like Gary, let's say if I'm Gary Davenport, and I have a relationship and a loyalty, and I'm part of a family, you know, they all have families to provide for. They need job security. And a lot of the guys don't have the aspirations to manage at the major league level. I wouldn't even begin to fathom what it takes, the intestinal fortitude that it takes to be a major league manager. You know, just
and all of it, yeah.
Exactly. And if I were a coach, I would be very content and happy to work very hard and dedicate my life to developing players in that organization who's remained loyal to me, and I will in turn remain loyal to them as well. Would you say? Do you think that's a fair thing to say, Gary? I mean,
no, I do. The way I look at it, I never played in the big leagues, so for me to get in the big leagues, it'd have to be a job that I felt I could actually do. It could be like maybe coach third base or be an infield guy or something like that. But like Dad always used to say, he goes, it's a buddy business, and maybe one of your friends gets in there, and then he brings his people that he's trust, and and the Giants have a good group up there right now, and they've been together for a long time, and they've been very successful. So there's no reason to break up that group. And if you notice, they haven't in a long time, and they'll do a little adjustment here and there. Maybe Flannery leaves, and Roberto Kelly goes over to first, and they bring Billy Hayes out of the pen to coach first. I mean, but it's all in house. They keep it in house, and I think they like that family atmosphere, and just like being comfortable with who you're working with.
Everybody's on the same page. They're all on the same page. They know each other. One thing I can say about the Giants organization is, and Gary will attest to this too, as far as the coaching staff in the major leagues and the minor league system, there's not a lot of egos. There aren't a lot of guys, and if they are, they'll end up weeding themselves out anyway. They're in this together, and their objective is to win. Their mission is to win, and they do that. They realize that they do that together, just like the club does out on the field. In order for that to happen, they're in unison. They're all on the same page, and that's why the Giants have such great success.
Well, a lot of it is vibes and karma. The Giants honor the San Francisco Giants honor the New York Giants more than the Mets honor the Mets. Former Mets, to give you an example, and it's well appreciated by an old New York Giant fan. If you go to AT&T and you walk around, they pay homage to the stars that I grew up watching. So I am very proud to look at that Giants emblem. Although the SF never looks as good as the NY to me on the cap, the unis are exactly the same. That cream color is exactly what I remember at the Polo Grounds when I was a little kid. And so in a way, I feel like an outsider, but somewhat a part of the party that you guys have and the family that you guys have. Love it, Timmy. It was a great episode.
I want to thank you, Gary, for taking some time out of your evening to join us tonight. It's always good talking to you. I'll talk to you here in the next week or so, I'm sure. But I wish you well and safe.
He'll be apologizing for me, Gary. Anything I said. If I was a microphone hog, I'd come by it naturally. So, but you were terrific, and I'm really glad you came. And again, your dad was such a hero of mine when I was growing up, and how cool it was in '62. And as Timmy and I always say, for 8 inches, a line drive to Bobby Richardson would have been a game winner, and that would have been it. So, what can I tell you?
Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Ralph. You guys be good. Gary, I love you. My love to the family, buddy.
All right, Timmy. Give my best.
Thank you again, Gary. Well, I hope you come back sometime soon.
Take care. Be well, guys. Bye-bye.